Hi, this is Lisamarie Costabile for Inside the Studio with Greg Wurth, and today I'm here with world-renowned drummer Michael Avenaim from Australia. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we talk about starting back in Australia when you started music?
I'm originally from Australia. I went to school for music in Australia at the Australian Institute of Music, but I actually studied classical percussion. Mm-hmm. So drums was a thing that I always wanted to do, and I always did it, but it was not something that my mom was approving of. So she made me go to school for something that she believed was going to be beneficial to me as a musician, which it is now. But at the time, I hated it because I just wanted to be a guy, rocking out and playing drums. But I did marimba and timpanis and all types of things like that in orchestras. And went through school like that, and then just became, I guess through the people that I had met, I became really obsessed with jazz.
Wow. Okay.
And then, went through this massive jazz phase where that was what I was going to do. So that was kind of late teenage years where I was convinced that the rest of my life I was going to be a jazz musician.
Okay. Was there music in your family, your mom or dad?
Yeah, so my dad's pretty musical, but it was not something that he pursued as a profession. But my uncle is a professional musician. He's a pretty successful experimental musician. So he worked with John Zorn and all types of experimental jazz musicians in New York and all over the place. He ran a really big music festival called What Is Music that was in Australia primarily, but it brought in international acts to Australia to do experimental music. So those were like the first gigs I ever did in Australia.
Wow.
He would just put me on a gig when I didn't know what to play and just tell me to play.
And how old were you at that point?
Probably 8.
Wow.
I think the first one I probably did, I was about 8. And then he put me on every year on the festival.
So it's totally in your blood. It's just your DNA.
Yeah, I think so. Like he's a big reason of why I play. I don't think growing up with him being around all the time and he's a great drummer. So just being around that and having his influence around really, I think, helped pave the way for me to kind of get where I needed to be.
And what bands were your biggest influence or singers or?
I don't know. That's a hard question. Okay. When people ask me that question, I like all types of music. I love like Zeppelin and things like that. But I think as a drummer, I think mostly jazz musicians were really what kind of got me to play the way I play. I love Tony Williams and Bill Stewart and those kinds of bebop musicians and things like that really helped me kind of style the way I do things. Right.
And so after you finished school, at what point did you?
So when I finished school, I was going to keep going and do more of the degree. Okay. And I met somebody whose boyfriend was in some band. And randomly they were looking for a drummer, and they called me and said, hey, like in 3 weeks we're going to go to America. Do you want to go? So I was like 18 at the time.
Nice.
And obviously I was like, yeah, I'm not going to school. I'm going to go to America. So I did, so I came when I was 18, and we came out here and cut a record at Paramount. So that was kind of my first like massive studio experience. Just kind of did that thing. And when I left, we went back to Australia, and then I was kind of stuck on that idea of that I needed to be in America.
You got to get back to America.
I did all like the X Factors and Australian Idols and all those kinds of things in Australia leading up to when I moved.
Okay.
But after that one particular trip, it kind of just, I had like a one-track mind that I needed to be in LA. So everything kind of went towards getting me to this point.
Okay. And when did you come to LA?
I moved here at the end of 2010. So it's almost 6 years.
Okay, that's still new.
Yeah.
I think it is. Don't you feel? Do you miss Australia?
No. Yeah.
Well, was the transition difficult? What is the difference between working on your craft and being a musician and collaborating in Australia compared to the U.S.?
I think Australia has a small scene. It's a great scene. There's wonderful musicians in Australia, because I think where we're in Australia looking at how, you know, America and all the big artists do all their stuff, and we want to replicate or be on that level. So everybody that's a professional in Australia is really a great musician. It's just a smaller scene, so I think it's limited to, you know, what artists are available and how big that market is. It's very contained. That market is really just Australia-based, unless you get the rare people that manage to get a track that comes across, like Gautier or Temper Trap or Jet. There have been certain bands that have managed to kind of push it over the line.
Right.
But otherwise, you're kind of stuck.
Right.
And if you're cool with that, it's great, you know. But I definitely wanted to see what else was around, and obviously America gives you that that option to kind of have so much stuff that you can do.
Right. So you fell in love with LA, basically.
Yeah,
Instead of Nashville or New York.
You know, I love Nashville too. You know, it's like I've spent a lot of time there, and I have like wonderful people there that I work with, and it's a really great scene. So I feel the same way about that city. It's an inspiring place to be, just because people are so proactive about making music, and that's really just the environment that I want to be in. Like, it keeps me motivated and wanting to work harder at what I'm doing by seeing other people that are, you know, really working hard at it.
And so what was some of the albums that you worked on when you first came to LA?
So I cut this record with this pop band, and I guess it was like a pop rock kind of 90s influenced, maybe Third Eye Blind-ish kind of record. So I did that, and we did a little promo on that, and then I moved after, like I mentioned, and maybe the first records, I did a lot of singer-songwriter records when I first moved to LA, just, you know, meeting people around, and through production, people that I knew, ended up doing that, and then still doing the X Factor Winners record from Australia. I cut that out here, in this room, and then lots of things, kind of all those projects and different stylistic sessions kind of led up to cutting that Scott Weiland record that I did, I guess, last year.
Okay,
we were cutting
2015.
2014 at the end, and like the beginning of 2015, we worked on that record.
And how did you connect with Scott?
So I randomly was playing a gig in Hollywood at a bar. I don't even remember what gig I was playing, but I had been playing, and I met this guy in the bar afterwards, and he was like, "Oh, you're great," and, you know, like, you know, I'll hook you up with gigs. And I was like, "Yeah, okay," you know, I just, you know, I met a guy in a bar, so I was like, whatever, you know, there's no way
Typical
this.
Hollywood.
Yeah, and I gave him a card, and that was the end of that. So I thought. And then I got a call like months later. Like,
wow.
I mean, months. It could have been 4 or 5 months later. I got a call from this guy, and he was like, "Hey, you know, I play drums for Scott Weiland, and I met you at the bar." And I was like, "Oh, great!" And he was like, "Yeah, you know, I'm busy, so do you want to do it?" You know, and
wow.
And I said yes, but it conflicted with a gig that I was already on.
Okay.
So I couldn't do it. So there might have been a year in between that space from that conversation that we had until I actually ended up doing the gig. I just kind of stayed in touch with him, and then finished a tour, and then got contacted again saying, "Hey, we need someone in like 2 weeks. Are you available?" And I had just finished a tour, and I was like, yeah, I'm available. So I ended up going out on that run, and maybe for the course of like a year was subbing for this other drummer when he was busy. He also plays for Alan Parsons.
Oh, okay.
So when he was busy, like, I would sub it out, and we kind of just swapped the gig back and forth. And during that process, they were writing the record. So I ended up writing a song with him that went on the record, and we just, you know, because we were together all the time, so Danny, who was the drummer, and I ended up splitting the playing on the record. Right. Just because really we worked out with schedules that we were not available or available, and that Scott just kind of used us because we were there, and he just wanted to make this record. So yeah, it just kind of happened all from this one particular meeting in a bar that I ended up on this tour and playing on the record and writing songs with him.
You just never know.
Yeah, you know, it really was one of those random events.
And how was it working with Scott? Like the collaboration, what was the process?
Yeah, that was a really interesting record for me to make because, you know, I believe that we make records very differently now to how we would have made records, you know, even 10 years ago probably. That we're in a situation now where, you know, I have this studio and I get sent things and we make records like that. You know, I never see the people I'm making records with. It goes back and forth. That record was really a collaborative, we're all going to make this record together. So we spent weeks in his studio just like making music, cutting tracks, live vocals, live guitars, live drums, everything just playing. And those kind of turned into the songs that we ended up putting on the record. So it was a very organic process with him. And very interesting, you know, seeing how he treated those sessions. You know, he was very musical. Like, he really knew what he wanted out of every performance. He was very detailed in telling me, like, how he wanted me to play, what he wanted, like, so much about the vibe that was coming across and the energy. He was really about that much more than, you know, any kind of technique involved in what you were doing. He just wanted to capture the
energy
experience.
And the vibe.
So it was great making the record like that because we were just all in a room for weeks together just making music.
Where was the studio?
He had a studio in Burbank called Lavish.
Okay.
It was a really great studio. He had like a Neve sidecar and an MCI console and a huge room. So it was cool. It was like tucked away in the back of an industrial area. You would never know, just like a door on a wall. The live room was very big. It was kind of like an industrial complex with a whole back area that he took over. So he had built, it was like concrete floors and big concrete walls. And then he built like a stage in the back corner of the room, which we tracked certain things on. Like, we would set the drums up in the middle of the room for part of the session, and then we would move them up onto the stage, and the stage was covered in Persian rugs.
Oh, wow.
So it was like really dead stuffed in that corner of the stage. So depending on like what portion of the room you put that kit, it was like a totally different vibe. So for some tracks, we cut them in that corner because he wanted that really dead, you know, 70s rock thing. And he had like, you know, synths and Moogs and like so many guitars. He actually had that guitar that they use in the Under the Bridge video clip. He had like all this stuff that he just randomly had acquired. And he was like super whatever about you using anything, which I loved. He, you know, he was like, yeah, use whatever guitar or drums. And he had all types of things there from like when they did the Velvet Revolver records. And it was cool. It was a really good studio. It's not there anymore, but it was a cool place to make music.
And how long was your relationship before he passed?
I mean, all up, it was probably like a 2-year thing that I did with him. But I worked with him a lot, you know, during that time. And obviously we spent a lot of time together when we were making that record. So it was a big shock when that happened.
Imagine.
Yeah, it just was not something that I expected. And that he was like, I had talked to him maybe a few weeks before it happened. And he was like super excited about the new record because they were really like right in the middle of promoting that new record. And he was like really excited about touring it and getting it out and promoting. He was like super excited about this particular record. So it was a big bummer. Like I felt like he was in a really good place when I talked to him.
Wow.
So that was a big shock to me because
There was nothing leading up to
no, not at all.
any...
It was just like I wasn't there. A friend of mine ended up playing guitar on that tour, and Joey Castillo, who plays for Queens of the Stone Age and Eagles of Death Metal, he was on that tour. And a friend of mine sent me a text when it happened.
Oh, wow.
And my response was, Scott, who? You know, because I didn't even put the pieces together that's what the situation was.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, you know, it was definitely not something that anyone expected.
Not a good year.
No.
No,
And also that Jeremy, who played guitar in that band too, passed away earlier that year.
Oh, okay.
So both of them in the same year was like a really,
Wow.
essentially 50% of the band that played on that record
Wow.
passed away last year.
Wow.
Dark side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And you mentioned some tracks that you have?
On that record?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I wrote a track with him on that record called Amethyst.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that kind of was like a weird situation too. You know, I showed up to do some pre-pro for the record and no one showed up to the studio that day. So I got there in the morning and Scott was just kind of hanging. He had a TV in the front of the studio and he would watch movies there all the time. And I showed up to the studio to do this pre-production, and we're just kind of sitting around like watching TV, waiting for people to show. And eventually I was just kind of playing guitar and he was like, oh, that's cool, you know, so that turned into a song. And I didn't think anything really of that. And then we put it on the record, you know,
Nice.
It ended up being this great song on the record. And then we worked on another track after we finished the record that we had written, again, randomly in a rehearsal, that he was like, well, we should cut this anyway and put it out after we do the record. And that song was called Back to the City. It was never released. You know, I'll make a video of that.
That's cool.
Eventually playing along to it. That was a really cool, you know, again, that was like a tracked in the corner of the room with the rugs and stuff to get that super dead rock sound. I used this kit actually on that.
Right, which you and Greg are going to go through a little bit.
Definitely.
So I want to ask you, before we wrap this up, you've been awesome. I want to ask you just random personal questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Don't mean to put you on the spot. So if you weren't, music aside, what would your second choice of career be?
You know, I love computers and things, so I would probably be some kind of...
Geek?
Yeah, definitely a geek. Some kind of web design something maybe, or real estate. I would probably do real estate.
Okay.
I feel like it's kind of like I feel like I could sell a house to somebody.
Really? Yeah. That's hilarious. I mean, I could see the design in here because it's beautiful.
Yeah,
You'd have to check out the studio.
Talk to them, you know, you want this house, you know, just buy it.
And so growing up, you're, 16, you're dating someone. What was that let's have sex song that you listened to?
I loved, I love, my like guilty pleasure is like neo soul, D'Angelo stuff. I love that stuff. So that would have definitely been, especially at 16, that would have definitely been like I want to put on some like super awesome neo soul record. Yeah, it would have been like Erykah Badu or D'Angelo or something like that. Okay.
And what is your guilty pleasure for food? Just random.
Man,
question.
I love chicken Parmigiana. I think that I could eat that every day for the rest of my life.
I have to ask you, where do you get it in LA? I'm Italian from New York,
yeah,
so...
I mean, there are a lot of places. It's funny, last night I was talking about this, like I should just make a blog of every Parmigiana that I've eaten. You know, I had a drum tech on this last tour that I was on where our goal was to eat Parmigiana in every single city we were at, just to compare them. But
I think you need to start with New York, San Francisco, Chicago.
Yeah, well, Little Tony's is a great place for Parmigiana. Okay. There's another restaurant called Reno's on Ventura that I love. Okay. They have a great Parmigiana.
Right up the street in Studio City.
Yeah, those are my like instant go-to spots when I want something like that. I had it last night, actually.
Nice. Yeah. And so when you're not recording or in the music, what are you doing? What are your hobbies?
I love movies. You know, I watch a lot of movies like that. My wife is like really into that, and her brother's a director, so like we're really into that kind of world. I like to do nothing. You know, a lot of the time, you know, when I'm not working, because it's rare for me to like not be on the go all the time. Mm-hmm. It's nice to kind of just sit around and not do anything.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, like, you know, I think that side of things is pretty simple. I just like spending time with her and not really doing anything, just hanging
That's
around.
cool.
Lots of TV.
Well, thanks for hanging out with
Yeah,
us. Now you're going to hang out with
you.
Greg, and they're going to go through some of the gear porn stuff. And
Cool.
thanks so much for joining us. This is Lisamarie Costabile for Inside the Studio, and I am here with Mike Avenaim.
Thank you.
Thanks.